Hello, I'm Attorney Dan Marr from the Nashua law firm of Hamlin & Kerrigan. I'm going to be talking today about what happens when you have a commercial tenant that breaches their lease. I've been practicing here in New Hampshire for 36 years and in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for 28, licensed in both states, practiced in both states. And I've represented malls, manufacturing buildings, so industrial buildings, office buildings, and a variety of other things for landlords as well as other business clients. Sometimes my clients have purchased the building, a bigger building, and they have a portion of it for their operations and the other portion they lease out, or maybe they're buying out the building or the plaza purely for investment purposes. But in either event is a serious situation when a tenant breaches their lease. It could be a matter of them not paying the rent. That's often the common situation. Maybe there's other issues that they're supposed to be doing that they're not doing. They're violating terms of the lease. First thing I have a discussion with my client is, what's the goal? Sometimes in like strip malls or the like, they don't want a dark space. So they might be more willing to work with that person temporarily depending on what the market's like, so that they don't have that person out and then it being sitting there vacant for a while. They might be willing to work out some type of deal with that person. And again, it's completely depending on what the economy is at that particular time. Or they might want that person out. Usually in the office parks and the manufacturing facilities, they want them out as quick as they can. So if they're not paying the rent, in New Hampshire, there's called a eviction notice and a demand for rent. And both of those are forms. They're on the websites. On the court websites, I generally, for the demand for rent and the eviction notice, it's a 7-day requirement. First, you want to follow the lease to make sure if there's any type of notice to cure, you have to follow that lease term because the court's going to require you to follow that. So you got to follow that to give them the opportunity to cure the default. And you might be able to do that consecutive at the same time as you're doing your eviction notice and your demand for rent, but you have to follow the process of the lease. And then if they're in default on that situation, you go forward with the landlord-tenant writ, and there's a process for that. I've talked about this in another blog. If you are trying to evict somebody, do not check off the box on the front page about trying to collect $1,500. You might think, or I think it might be $1,500, whatever that dollar amount is, don't do it. If you're a commercial landlord and you want to get that person out of the space, you do not want any fights on counterclaims where they come up and they say, well, maybe I owe rent, but the landlord was supposed to do this. They were supposed to fix the roof. They were supposed to do something else. You're going to have a lot more streamlined process on the eviction if you don't check that box. So I strongly recommend you don't check that box if you're trying to get that person out. Then thereafter, when you're suing for damages, you don't have a cap on the damages like you do if you check that box. You can go for whatever damages are. Sometimes I've had clients that have had tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes over $100,000 worth of rent owed, and you certainly want to go forward and try to collect that, but you want to do that in a separate proceeding from the eviction. You also want to find out in the circumstances what your lease terms say as to, can you collect your attorney's fees, can you collect interest, all of those things in your lease. You look for that carefully and you put that all into your damage claim in regards to this. A lot of my clients will have a guarantee from the individual. If there's an LLC or a corporation that's renting as the tenant, the individual signs. I strongly recommend that. As I strongly recommend when you're preparing the leases that you have, the landlord gets his attorney's fees or her attorney's fees if they're successful in the collection of this from the tenant. So those are worthwhile. But even if you don't have a guarantee, and sometimes you're going to hear from the tenant that the tenant says something that gives you an opportunity to go for them personally. I've had situations where I've had commercial tenants that are explaining in their circumstances that they themselves put everything into this business. They put their retirement savings in this business, and they've only gotten, and while you're owed $100,000, landlord, I put in $500,000 of my investments into this business, and all I got back was $200,000, so I'm still out $300,000. What they just told you was they, as an insider, paid themselves off before you, and there's under the Uniform Fraudulent Transfer Act, there's a potential claim that you can go after them individually to the extent that they took that money. Also, there might be situations where they're taking money when the company is insolvent, so they're making distributions to themselves. And then under some circumstances, depending on how they're operating that LLC or corporation, there's something called piercing the corporate veil, where you can actually, and I've talked about this in other blogs, where you can go under through the veil of the LLC or the corporation. They call it corporate veil, but it applies equally for LLCs, and you can go after the individual. I've dealt with these cases quite a bit. I've been doing a lot of creditor rights and landlord law for many years, for decades. I'm happy to help if the opportunities arise. I'm at 603-883-5501, Dan Marr at 603-883-5501. You can go on to our website, NashvilleLaw.com, all one word, Nashville Law, and then .com. Check out my bio, and from there you can click down and you can look at the vlogs all by topic category to see if there's any other vlogs, and I expect there will be, that are interesting to you. I do a weekly vlog, so there's quite a bit of them there. Hope to help you if the opportunity arises. Thank you.